reading this book, you might start to wonder how newspapers ever survived as media. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, Read Good Draw Bad, where we love to read really good and draw pretty darn bad. Today we are entering the fascinating and somewhat concerning world of newspapers and newspaper journalism. We will be heading to Africa, to the land of Ishmaelia, an Eastern African country, with an accidental war correspondent, William Booth. Today we will be reading Evelyn Waugh's Scoop, where our hero will fumble his way into incredible international news. Now, just so you know, I'm doing a reading challenge where I'm reading the Modern Library's top 100 novels of the 20th century, as decided by the Modern Library. First, a TLDR on this book. Now, when we talk about scoop, we certainly aren't talking about a scoop of ice cream, although I do love ice cream. In journalism, a scoop, or an exclusive, is an item of news reported by one journalist or news organization before others, and of exceptional originality, importance, surprise, excitement, or secrecy. Which means whoever has the best news fastest wins. And in particular, we are following the newspaper The Daily Beast and its war correspondent William Booth, as he tries to get the most sensational news possible. Now, to describe our main character, the hero of this book, William Booth, he is someone who is obsessed with facts, but mostly facts about nature. In fact, he is the nature columnist for the Daily Beast and has no experience on reporting for war whatsoever. For one reason or another, the Daily Beast paper confuses him with the famous novelist and writer, John Courtney Booth. As the editors have a deadline to travel to this fictitious country in East Africa called Ishmaelia, they realize they have to send William Booth whether he likes it or not, because otherwise someone's getting fired. The best part about the reason for needing this war correspondent is this is a desire driven by a very rich and sort of evil newspaper overlord, Lord Copper. He is someone who himself believes he is pulling the strings of Western society as he writes the narrative that all normal, average people read every day. And the joke is, of course, is that Lord Copper thinks he's getting the famous novelist to write this incredible, important story, and instead he's getting the local reporter who talks about cows in the daily newspaper, which, as you can imagine, is a much different kind of person. After he agrees to go to Ishmaelia, starts to feel like a bit of a celebrity right up until the point that he gets to the airport and realizes he needs a passport and doesn't have one, and he will have to go through the whole process of getting a passport to a war-torn country that has specific visa and requirements, and in short order because he is on a ticking clock because he needs to be there to report the news before it actually happens. This multiple day delay means he is taking the slowest possible boat all the way to Ishmaelia, and he is now not going to be on the same travel schedule as the other journalists who arrived before him. As he travels to arrive in East Africa, he meets up with his rival and somewhat mentor, Corker. Corker, in this case, helps out William Booth and tries to make him understand the importance of the kind of journalism they are doing. And he explains how news agencies work on these kind of press tours. You know, you've got a lot to learn about journalism. Look at it this way. News is what a chap who doesn't care much about anything wants to read. And it's only news until he reads it. After that, it's dead. We're paid to supply news. Following this, Corker explains that Booth needs to send messages back to the Daily Beast using something called wire messages, which is just like a super duper expensive version of a text message. As Corker explains all this, they are slowly on their way to the heart of all the action, which is the capital city of Jacksonburg. And this town of Jacksonburg was created by one family, and the ruling powers are now fighting over who's going to be in control as the war breaks out in Ishmaelia. Now, Booth thinks he's going to go and just be on the front lines where the action is. However, because of the way that war journalism works, he is constantly denied access to various things or various people or various events, and the other journalists are just as frustrated as him, because the reality is that none of the officials who are involved in Ishmaelia want any of these reporters to be able to report anything at all. And the truth is that information is very scarce at the start of the war for any kind of journalist. And I wish that wasn't like really relevant to today's context, but here we are. To get outside of town, reporters need a military escort. But to first have a military escort, they must fill out the appropriate paperwork. And to get this paperwork, which would give you a permit, you can't get a permit until the military says that they're allowing people to get permits. And they can't go to the front line yet of the war, even though they're waiting for it, because the war hasn't started yet and there is no front line of the war. And so you have a particularly awkward situation where the reporters are waiting around for the war to begin and for something to happen, and the newspapers back home in their home countries are sending angry messages wanting the reporters to report on some news. And so, as the pressure mounts, various reporters in this situation try to either create news, create false stories, or to scoop the real story from other journalists. And part of this is the bureaucrats and the officials of Jacksonburg sending the reporters on wild goose chases or chasing down fake stories so that they stay away from the real action that's happening in Jacksonburg. And you can take the example where the officials tell them that they will go on a tour of Laku, which should give them war reporting stories, but in reality, William Booth, who is trying to do investigative journalism, realizes and is told by various people Laku doesn't even exist. So he resists going to this fake place that the officials made up just so that they could get rid of the reporters. William Booth slowly starts to build up sources of information within the town, and one of those sources of information is Katchen, a girl he slowly falls in love with. And they use the money from the newspaper to bribe the right officials so that the reporter, Booth, can get the story he needs to send back to his editors. But the most hilarious part is as the paper is extremely angry because Booth is working on finding the real story, he is getting a wire message that he is about to be fired and to stop trying to do any reporting whatsoever, while he is sending back the actual story that he has found about the corruption that's involved in Jacksonburg. And so here's the wire message that Booth sends as they're sending him at the exact same time: "You're fired and stop working for us." Nothing much has happened except to the president, who's been imprisoned in his own palace by revolutionary junta headed by a superior black called Benito and Russian Jew, who Bannister says is up to no good. They say he is drunk and his children try to see him, but the governess says most unusual lovely spring weather, bubonic plague raging. Because he has found the real news story, he gets fired, he sends the right message, and then he gets rehired, and he is expected to follow up to provide the whole entire story. As you can imagine, this book is a comedy of errors about the wrong time, the wrong place, the right place, and the right time. And part of being a reporter is being in the right place at the right time with the right resources to get the story you need. Now, as Booth is a hero for discovering this corruption within Ishmaelia and within Jacksonburg, he now becomes a hero back home. But for Booth, he doesn't care about all of that because he's fallen in love with Katchen, the girl who's been helping him the entire time. Only he finds out she's really only been using him for money and waiting for her husband to return, which he eventually does, and she ditches him for the husband who she actually loves. Now, our heartbroken hero returns to England, and instead of being happy about all the praise or about how he's going to be a great public figure, the only thing William wants to go back to doing is reporting on news on nature. To keep the public satisfied, as Lord Cooper has announced a giant event where they'll talk about war journalism, they need someone to be the face of that war journalism. And because William decides he will not go to any sort of banquet, the only person that the editors can get to go is William's deranged Uncle Theodore. And in a not so surprising turn of events, he gets one final letter from Katchen letting him know that she still cares about him, but could he send a little bit more money, please? As if she hasn't taken him to the cleaners for all the money she's taken from him already. And William realizes at that point he's over his first real love in his life. Now, the story ends very happily with William Booth going back to doing the one thing he really loves, which is reporting on animals. Now on to the review. This book is funny, like really, really funny, almost laugh out loud funny. And the best part about it is that the important people in this book are not important at all. In fact, the important people with lots of money and influence scream weaponized incompetence. They are literally the exact example of too much money and not enough common sense. One thing I think about a lot while reading and rereading this book is the Shakespearean quote from Macbeth. "Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player, that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale, told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing." And to me, that is kind of how telling the news is when you're talking about telling the news on this grand scale about what it means to explain what is happening to a population that doesn't really understand what's happening. And this quote from Macbeth is sort of like the mean version from the more popular quote from Shakespeare from As You Like It, saying that all the world's a stage and that men and women are merely players. And really, the whole crux of this book relies on the idea that we don't care too much about the accuracy of what's happening, but we do care about how fast we can get the information. Because in many moments in this book, we realize that the reporters, the editors, and the funders of the newspapers don't actually care that much about the information or the accuracy of the information in the stories, as long as it will sell the newspapers. Our hero, William Booth, learns The truth is only part of what makes a great newspaper story. A great example is how the book starts, where Boot is having an extreme crisis because one of the editors or editor assistants changed the title of his article on badgers from being about badgers to being about a crested grebe. And unsurprisingly, letters to the editor were talking about how stupid this reporter was, when in reality, it was a failure of people above him that he had no control over. Which is not so different than how reporting exists today, and this is especially true when writing headlines. Another theme in this book is that to be news, to be something important to the average person, it must be timely and it has to arrive at the right time. And part of the genius of this book is how Boot is constantly in the wrong place at the wrong time, and yet he still is the one who manages to get the story. And part of that, of course, is because part of war reporting or part of any journalism is that you are working with limited information and you don't know what's real until it's already happened. And as a reporter, you're constantly fighting against various forces and factions that don't want you to report scandal, that don't want you to report a story, like the bureaucrats and the various war factions that are involved in Ishmailia. Now, hidden in this book, but not maybe that hidden, is the theme of colonialism involved in African nations. This book is about a reporter going to a fictitious place in East Africa, but it could absolutely be real and be a story about blood diamonds. Because the main purpose of going to Ishmailia and for there to be a war is because various colonial powers are interested in the mineral rights of the very valuable resources that are located in Ishmailia. Now, the joy and humor in this book, and this is part of what makes Evelyn Waugh one of my favorite writers, is he is able to show that in real situations where not everyone has all the information, it's not the most powerful people that have all the power. In fact, it's the people who can resist the influence of powerful people that eventually end up winning the day. At least in this case, for William Booth. It really shows how good journalism can change the outcome of a situation from who is going to win in a situation or which powers in the world are going to win in a situation by what is exposed to the public. Because once some things are exposed, it's really hard for certain powers and certain influencers to act in the way they want because too many people are paying attention. So a heroic reporter, similar to William Booth in this case, is not someone necessarily who's the smartest, the brightest, the best at reporting, the best at everything, but instead someone who would say no to people influencing him or also not accepting bribes from powerful people just so that they can be, financially compensated. A good reporter is someone who can stick to their ethics and what they believe in and try and report the story as accurately as possible, given their constraints. I will say it is absolutely essential for modern society to function well to have great reporters who can report factually on the news and present the whole picture for people to make their own decisions about what's really happening, which is something that's really hard to find today. Anyways, I highly recommend this book and I really recommend that you read it. Okay, well, if you like this review, please like, share, and subscribe, and you can hit the bell notification if you want to know the next time I release a new video. I think for now, we can leave the world of war and war correspondence and journalism behind, and we will be moving into someone also saying goodbye to war in A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway, which coincidentally was his first bestseller. Well, that's all for me this week. I hope you're getting some great reading done, and I hope you have a wonderful week. As always, stay curious, stay reading.